A brilliant black teenager in a pink graduation dress was just trying to board her flight to MIT, a dream she'd worked her whole life for. But when she stepped into the airport terminal, everything changed. Targeted by security, accused of theft without a shred of evidence, she was humiliated in front of hundreds of travelers. 7 minutes later, her world was turned upside down. What happened next shocked the entire airport and sparked a national conversation no one could ignore. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we dive in, comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that shine a light on the truth. Now, it all started on what should have been the most exciting day of her life. They say time moves differently in an airport, that it halts, surges, pauses, trembles. But I have learned, no, I have lived, the truth that in America, it is not time that moves differently, it is justice. Naomi Ellison stood beneath the artificial light of Atlanta International Airport, her skin warm brown like the Georgia earth her people once picked cotton from, now dressed in a soft pink that shimmered like defiance. The dress was a gift from her grandmother, who had sewn strength into every stitch and pride into every fold. It was her graduation dress, the one she had worn while speaking of robotics and resistance and all the invisible wires that connected her to something greater than herself. Now she stood alone, gripping a boarding pass that bore the weight of more than a name. It carried the burden of dreams too often delayed. She was 17. Bright, black, brilliant, and too young to know that the world could turn on her without ever raising its voice. Her mother, Clara, had reminded her to pack snacks. Her father, Isaiah, newly appointed to the federal bench, had reminded her of something else. You must be twice as good to get half as far. And you must never forget that the people who built this nation may smile at you in airports, but not all of them see you as someone who belongs on the plane. She had laughed then, the laugh of someone still hopeful. But hope, my friend, is often what the world aims at first. As Naomi wheeled her suitcase through the terminal, older white men in business suits passed her with expressions that had never had to explain their innocence. A mother pulled her child slightly closer, not out of malice, but instinct. And that is what terrifies me most about this nation, not the hatred that screams, but the fear that whispers. You see, racism does not always arrive in burning crosses. No, sometimes it is subtle, polite, well-dressed, and quiet. It stands behind counters, holds walkie-talkies, asks for just a moment of your time, miss, while the clock on your future ticks louder. And still, Naomi pressed forward. She passed a kiosk where an older black janitor wiped floors no one thanked him for. He looked up at her, saw the pink dress, the braids, the determination, and gave her a small nod. A passing of something unspoken. She nodded back. She knew. It was not yet a battlefield. Not yet. But it would be. The rhythm of the story is slow here, measured. But don't mistake that for peace. It is the kind of quiet that comes before the sirens. The kind of calm that history has taught us always arrives before the incident. For now, Naomi smiled at another MIT-bound student, struck up conversation, and dared, for just a second, to believe that the airport was neutral ground. But nothing in America is neutral. Not land. Not language. And certainly not airports. They are machines of sorting. And soon, Naomi would learn just how well-oiled that machine truly is. It began, how it always begins, with a smile. Naomi saw the hoodie before she saw the boy. MIT stitched in bold white across dark cotton. It was a symbol, a passport of merit. She approached with the kind of ease only the very young still carry, introduced herself, and was met by a smile, a kind one, the kind that said you belong here too. His name was Eli Tanaka. Second generation. Son of engineers. Sharp, funny, kind. The two of them talked like they were on the same frequency, connected not just by a school, but by the heavy light of expectation. Naomi's nerves loosened. In a sea of strangers, she had found another island. For a moment, she forgot the weight of her pink dress, the texture of her skin, the history it carried. But the world did not forget. Just a few feet away stood a woman with sun-damaged skin, pearls too tight around her neck, and eyes that had learned over time to fear what they did not understand. She saw the hoodie, too. She saw the smile. But what she really saw was Naomi. And that was all it took. A sideways glance. A whisper to a man in uniform. A finger raised, not high, not loud, but precise. That is how racism survives in America. Not in fire, but in suggestion. Naomi excused herself to the restroom, unaware of the story being written in her absence. The one that had no author, only witnesses. She walked past store windows filled with perfume and watches she couldn't afford, not because she was black, but because she was 17. And still, that distinction would not matter soon. She passed a security guard who did not smile back. She passed a white mother who clutched her purse tighter, not out of intent, but instinct. And again, I say to you, instinct is history's camouflage. When Naomi emerged from the restroom, everything had shifted. 3 officers stood waiting, postures stiff with purpose. One pointed at her. Another motioned for her to come over. Their words were rehearsed. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you." They always are. She blinked, confused. Is something wrong? They said a theft had occurred. A luxury store. A bracelet. The description was vague, but somehow it matched her. And here is where the rhythm tightens. Here is where the melody turns minor. Because what was once an airport is now a stage. Passengers slow their steps. Some stop walking entirely. Eyes find Naomi, some curious, some cruel, some weary, and some pretending not to see at all. One officer opens her suitcase. Another removes a velvet pouch, her grandmother's necklace, passed down like scripture. And here is the irony that makes your throat tighten. The symbol of her legacy is treated like stolen property. "Do you have a receipt for this?" they ask. A receipt for memory. A receipt for inheritance. A receipt for dignity. Naomi says no. She shouldn't need one. But at that moment, it is not her word that matters, it is her color. I want you to understand something, especially those of you old enough to remember separate fountains and back doors. This is not new. It has simply changed costumes. In 1965, they locked you out of lunch counters. In 2025, they search your bag while asking you to smile. Naomi asked to call her father. They laughed. One said, "Unless you're under arrest, that's not necessary." Another muttered, "She should have thought of that before she stole something." And here, at last, the lie completes its circuit. She is now a criminal. Not because of evidence. Not because of action. But because of proximity, profile, and pink. The officers led her away. She looked back. Eli stood in line, his expression twisted with disbelief. He would be the first witness. But not the last. The room was small. No windows. Just gold chairs and colder eyes. Naomi sat there, 17 and still, like she'd been dropped in the middle of someone else's nightmare. The pink dress now wrinkled from the search. Her grandmother's necklace lay on the table like a piece of evidence in a trial she hadn't even known was happening. They didn't raise their voices. That would have made it too obvious. No, the real machinery of racial control doesn't yell anymore. It questions politely. It searches thoroughly. It holds you gently by the wrist and says, "It's just a procedure." There were 3 of them now. Officer Dunlap, older, heavy, his voice smooth with the certainty of someone who had never been doubted. Officer Reyes, young, Latina, her silence heavier than her badge. And Officer Knox, arms crossed, standing by the door like he was guarding a border. Naomi tried to speak, but they kept interrupting. "Where were you before the coffee shop? Do you know anyone who works at the duty-free? Why don't you have a receipt for the necklace?" And I must tell you, dear reader, especially those who lived through the law and order years, this too is a form of violence. To be asked to prove your innocence when the only thing you're guilty of is not looking like them. Naomi reached for her phone. They froze. "I want to call my parents," she said. Dunlap rolled his eyes. "And what are they going to do? Fly in and give us a lecture?" "My father is Judge Isaiah Ellison," she said, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from rage held in check. Knox scoffed. "Right. And my daddy's the mayor of Atlanta." She stared at them, unblinking. "Google him." Now here is where the music shifts. The beat slows, then tightens. Dunlap tapped the keyboard. And suddenly, the room changed. No one said it out loud, but it was there in the stiffness of their backs, the sudden care in their words. They realized they hadn't detained just a black girl. They detained a black girl with power. And in America, that makes all the difference. But don't clap yet, because this is where the real contradiction lives. It shouldn't take a title to be treated like a human being. It shouldn't take a federal judge for your daughter to be believed. Naomi sat silently, watching them squirm under the weight of their own assumptions. Officer Reyes glanced at her, then looked away. Even now, even with the truth crawling across the screen in front of them, they hesitated. Not to say sorry. Not to admit fault. But to decide whether her father's position was worth their apology. Naomi's phone rang. Her father's voice came through, calm, composed, thunder wrapped in velvet. "Stay where you are," he said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Naomi, "Yes, Daddy. You did the right thing. Now listen to me, my elders, my brothers and sisters who watched the dogs turned loose in Selma and the hoses in Birmingham. The battleground has changed. Today, it's fought with keyboards and badges, in security offices and terminals. But the war is the same. It is the war for dignity, for the right to exist without suspicion. To wear a pink dress and carry a family heirloom without being treated like a suspect in a country you helped build." As Naomi waited for her father, a thought entered her mind, not loud, but firm. If I didn't have him, if I was alone, would they even let me go? And the truth, unspoken but sharp, answered, no. No, they would not. There is a certain silence that arrives before justice. It is not peaceful. It is the silence of men who've realized they may have pressed the wrong child against the wall. It is the silence of uniforms suddenly too tight, of breath held in the throat like an unanswered prayer. And when Isaiah Ellison stepped into that security office, tall, brown-skinned, shoulders square with the burden of generations, that silence shattered. He did not shout. He didn't have to. Because when a black man walks into a room knowing the law better than the ones who enforce it, the room remembers every lie it just told. Naomi looked up, her eyes wet but burning. Her father's gaze passed over her suitcase, over her necklace, laid out like contraband on the cold metal table. And then it landed on them. Officer Dunlap tried to smile. It came out wrong. "Judge Ellison," he said too quickly, You were just what?" Isaiah asked, his voice a quiet blade. "Detaining a minor without her parents? Rifling through her personal belongings? Assuming guilt from the color of her dress or her skin?" Knox straightened. Reyes stepped back. And Dunlap stood still, the color draining from his face. Isaiah turned toward Naomi. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but it wasn't the truth. It never is. Because how can you be all right in a country where your value must be proven, not assumed? "Now," Isaiah said, turning back, "tell me, officer, what was the description?" "A young black girl," Dunlap replied, "in a pink dress. Reported near the duty-free area." Isaiah's face didn't flinch, but his words did. "And tell me, sir, how many young black girls in pink dresses passed through this airport today? 10? 20? Or just mine?" Dunlap didn't answer. Because if you stopped all of them, that's profiling. And if you stopped only her, that's still profiling. Now let me speak plainly, dear elders. This is the part where they always try to pivot. They mention protocol. They speak of duty, of training, of anonymous tips. But what they never say out loud is what they really saw when they looked at Naomi. They didn't see an MIT-bound scholar. They didn't see the daughter of a judge. They saw a possibility of trouble. That is the tragedy of the black child in America. They are taught to dream like everyone else, but police like a threat the moment that dream begins to rise. Reyes, to her credit, lowered her eyes and said, quietly, "I'm sorry, Miss Ellison." Isaiah looked at her, then at the others. "Sorry," he repeated. "Is that what we offer now in exchange for dignity?" He picked up Naomi's necklace, held it in the palm of his hand. This belonged to her grandmother, a woman who cleaned white folks' houses so her children could one day sit in courtrooms instead of standing in line. He turned toward Knox. "And you held it up like a piece of evidence. Because someone pointed. Because that was all it took." The air grew still again, but not the way it had been before. Now it was the kind of stillness that only follows exposure. The kind that comes when truth has been spoken so clearly it leaves no room for retreat. "I want the name of the witness," Isaiah said. "We can't give." "You will," he interrupted. "Or I'll subpoena the footage, file a motion, and ensure this airport becomes a case study in racial profiling at the next oversight hearing." They gave the name. And in that moment, Naomi realized something awful. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. And every now and then, when someone with power gets caught in its teeth, it pretends to apologize, so it can keep on chewing. Isaiah turned to Naomi once more. "We'll get you on the next flight. First class. And we will make sure this never happens to you again." Naomi nodded. But even at 17, she understood. There was no guarantee. Not even with a father like hers. Not even with the law on their side. Because the real trial had never been in that room. It had been outside, in every glance, every whisper, every unspoken assumption. Let me tell you something we've always known. In this country, justice is not blind. It sees color quite well. What it does not see, what it often refuses to see, is the cost. Naomi stood outside the security office now, the pink dress no longer soft or celebratory but rumpled, clinging to her like shame. Her suitcase, once carefully packed, was carelessly reassembled, clothes creased, her grandmother's necklace tucked tightly in her hand like a relic that had survived a war. She felt exposed. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had been seen the way this country insists on seeing people who look like her, through a lens that distorts, that reduces, that criminalizes innocence. The terminal buzzed with indifference. No announcement had been made. No apology had echoed through the loudspeakers. The world just kept spinning, like it always does, pretending not to notice what it chooses to forget. But then, a voice. "Naomi." She turned. There stood Eli Tanaka, her MIT-bound stranger-turned friend, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes wide with concern. "I waited," he said simply. "I wouldn't be getting on the plane if you weren't with me." And there it was. A small act of solidarity. Now, I must tell you, to those listening who've lived long enough to know what this country does to the ones who dare to stand with us. That boy risked nothing and everything at that moment. He could have boarded the plane. Could have said it wasn't his business. Could have rationalized it away like so many have before him. But instead, he stood still. He stayed behind. And I tell you, sometimes, that is the bravest thing a person can do in America. Naomi blinked. She didn't trust the tears gathering at the corner of her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Eli replied. "But I had to. That's the tension, isn't it? This nation teaches its children to chase individual success, to mind their own business, to keep their heads down. But justice is a communal act. It cannot survive in silence." Isaiah stepped forward and extended a hand to Eli. "Thank you," he said, and in that gesture, firm, steady, full of a history the boy could only partially grasp, there was a passing of something sacred. Not forgiveness. Not finality. But recognition. They walked to the airline desk together. The staff now attentive, apologetic, efficient. They offered first-class seats on the next flight. They smiled too often, trying too hard. The system was trying to scrub the stain from its record. But you cannot unspill blood by wiping the floor. You cannot unmake harm by pretending it was never done. While they waited for the flight, Naomi scrolled through her phone. Already, whispers of her story had begun to spread. A video here, a tweet there. A few passengers had filmed the officers escorting her. Others were tagging the airport. And here is the hypocrisy, sharp as glass. In a country that demands Black folks behave better, it has never learned to watch itself more carefully. Eli leaned over. Are you going to say something? Naomi hesitated. Then, yes, not for me. For the next girl. The one who doesn't have a judge for a father. The one who won't have someone waiting at the gate. Now, to those of you who've lived through the fire hoses and the redlining, who've seen the inside of courtrooms where the verdict was already written before you entered. You know what I'm talking about. You know what it means to tell the truth out loud and how costly that truth can be. But you also know something else. That every movement begins with someone refusing to be silent. And in that airport terminal, beneath the blinking monitors and the bland announcements, Naomi Ellison pulled out her phone, looked straight into the camera, and began. My name is Naomi. I was profiled today. I was searched. I was treated like a criminal. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I'm telling you because you need to know this still happens. In 2025. In America. To girls like me. All the time. There is something electric about the truth when it's finally spoken aloud. It does not whisper. It cracks. It cuts through the static, through the noise, through all the polite denials and uncomfortable silences that so many have wrapped around themselves like coats against a storm they pretend doesn't exist. Naomi's voice, quiet and unwavering, traveled far that night. It traveled beyond Gate 12, beyond Atlanta, beyond the airport. And it landed hard in the hands of a nation that has always been skilled at ignoring Black pain until it becomes too loud to sleep through. Her video was less than 2 minutes long, but it carried centuries. In it, she did not shout. She did not beg. She did not accuse. She simply told the truth. And in America, my dear elders, that has always been the most radical act a Black person can perform. By the time Naomi's plane touched down in Boston, her name was trending. People were angry, some righteously, others performatively. There were calls for an investigation. A handful of celebrities tweeted her video. Civil rights organizations asked for interviews. The airport issued a statement full of corporate sorrow, promising to review internal procedures with all the urgency of a man brushing dirt under a rug. But beneath the noise, beneath the buzz, something deeper stirred. It was the recognition, by thousands, perhaps millions, that they had lived it too. A mother from Baltimore wrote, "My son was pulled aside at LaGuardia for walking too confidently. Thank you for speaking out." A man from Oakland wrote, "They searched me every time I flew. I thought I was the only one." A girl from Mississippi wrote, "I wear pink dresses too." The chorus grew. And yet, so did the resistance. Fox News called it overblown. Online trolls flooded her comments with lies, threats, and old American poison. Even a few voices from within her own community cautioned her to stay humble, to not make waves. But here's what those people forgot. Naomi had already drowned. She had been submerged in shame, in suspicion, in silence, and she had survived it. Now, she had no patience for those who mistook compliance for grace. At MIT, she was met with both applause and discomfort. Professors praised her courage in public, then lowered their voices behind closed doors. Administrators offered counseling, but avoided eye contact when asked about campus security disparities. The same old contradictions. A country that wants Black excellence, but fears Black agency. That celebrates your scholarship, but questions your authority to name your own pain. Late one night, alone in a campus lab, Naomi stared at the prosthetic arm she had been building for weeks. She whispered to herself, "This is what I came here to do. But maybe I'm supposed to build more than machines." And from that whisper was born an idea, an algorithm. a system to track racial patterns in airport security protocols. She called it the Pink Dress Protocol, because sometimes the only way to survive the fire is to engineer the water. Now, to you, elders who have marched, who have bled, who have seen the dream deferred again and again. You know what it means when one voice becomes many. You know the loneliness of being first and the beauty of not being last. And you know more than anyone that the people who change this country are never the ones invited to the table. They are the ones who flip the table over and build something entirely new from the rubble. So when Naomi sat down to draft her first proposal for that algorithm, she did not ask for permission. She remembered the security office. She remembered the officers' faces. She remembered the look on her father's face, that mix of rage, pain, and pride. And she began to write not just code, but history. Because she was no longer just the girl in the pink dress. She was becoming something else entirely. A problem this country could no longer ignore. Progress in this country has always been a slow and reluctant beast. It does not gallop, it groans. And it does not move unless someone is behind it, pushing, with hands bloodied by the labor of proving what should already be known. That we are human. That we belong. That we are enough. Naomi Ellison was not supposed to build systems. She was supposed to enter them, excel in them, and remain grateful for the chance. That is the script. That is the cage. But Naomi, in her quiet brilliance, decided to rewire not just machines, but the myth that wrapped around them. The algorithm began as an idea scratched onto a notepad during a sleepless night, dots and arrows, questions and patterns. But what she was chasing wasn't math alone. She was chasing truth, buried in data, veiled by bureaucracy, hiding in the bones of a country that has always claimed to be fair, while moving the finish line further for those who look like her. It was called the Pink Dress Protocol, and it asked one simple question. Who gets stopped and why? Now let me speak to those of you who have seen the maps of red lines drawn across your neighborhoods, who have been followed through stores, pulled over for blinking too slow, passed over for jobs with smiles too wide. You already know what Naomi's data found. That black passengers were stopped more often. That search yielded less contraband. That suspicious behavior was often just existing while black. And most damning of all, that none of it surprised anyone who had lived it. The university wanted to be proud, but cautious. The press wanted sound bites, not systems. The agencies she contacted smiled and stalled. And even her own department asked if she'd considered the political implications. That is the trick of American progress. It welcomes your genius, as long as it doesn't question power. But Naomi kept building. She teamed up with Eli and Priya, an engineering mind and a data scientist with sharp instincts. They poured hours into spreadsheets, code, and ethics reviews. They studied machine learning to teach machines how to unlearn bias. They fed the system thousands of anonymized records, and with every line of code, the truth sharpened. The problem wasn't randomness. The problem was design. And oh, my dear friends, doesn't that sound familiar? They call it a glitch when a black child is expelled for raising their voice, but a white child gets a second chance. They call it a coincidence when security stops a brown man 6 times, but never his colleague. They call it unfortunate when a black girl is treated like a suspect until her father walks in with a robe and a title. But Naomi called it what it was. A system functioning exactly as intended. And she dared to ask, what if we made a new one? One afternoon, a call came. It was the TSA director. They had reviewed her work. And for the first time in a long time, they listened. They agreed to launch a pilot of her protocol at 3 airports, including Atlanta. She told her father that night. Isaiah Ellison, who had once been a boy in the back of a segregated bus, stared at his daughter and said, "You are the future I prayed for." But Naomi knew better. She was the future his generation had built with their bare hands, their aching backs, their undying belief that justice was possible, even in a land that denied them their full name. Now, let us not romanticize the moment. The launch was not celebrated by all. Some unions objected. Some agencies balked. Anonymous hate mail arrived with frightening regularity. But Naomi had already passed through something darker. She had faced humiliation without flinching. She had seen the mask slip and survived. And that is a kind of armor you do not buy. And so, as the algorithm went live, she stood in the terminal where it had all begun, where her body was once treated like evidence, and watched the system monitor patterns in real time. Not to punish, but to prevent. Not to name names, but to shift power. And this, my dear elders, is what you must understand. She did not win. She worked. She fought. She endured. And in doing so, she carved open a space where others might walk more freely. That, too, is victory. Not the kind you see on banners, but the kind that lives in lowered voices, in second glances reconsidered, in one less child stopped for no reason at all. Every generation inherits a fire. Some try to smother it. Some pretend it never burned. But others, our boldest, our bravest, step into it, knowing full well it might consume them. And still they go because something in them refuses to leave the world as it is. Naomi Ellison, the girl in the pink dress, was no longer just that. She had become a signal. To some, a threat. To others, a promise. She stood now, months after the incident, on a stage shaped like a question mark, invited to speak before a panel of policymakers, scholars, and agency heads who had all read her name in articles, seen her face on screens, but had never truly heard her speak. The lights above her were bright, but she did not flinch, because she had earned the light. 2 years ago, she began, her voice clear, steady. I was detained in this country for wearing a pink dress while black. No one moved. No one dared to. She spoke of systems, of silence, of suspicion wrapped in procedure. She spoke of her algorithm, how it could not undo history, but could reveal its fingerprints in the present. She did not weep, because the time for tears had passed. This was a time for reckoning. She told them, "You cannot fix what you will not face, and you will not face what you refuse to measure." That was the genius of her work. It forced the country to look at itself, not with the gauzy nostalgia of American exceptionalism, but with the cold clarity of numbers, patterns, and lives interrupted. But it is not the system that frightens me most. It is the people who believe the system is neutral. It is those who say, "We've made so much progress," as though our progress were not measured in bodies survived, not lives lived fully, but simply in how politely the violence now arrives. Naomi's voice grew firmer. I was lucky. My father was a judge. My story was recorded. But most are not. Most disappear in the quiet, in the gray zones of policy, in the shrug of an officer who thought they looked suspicious. She paused. Not for drama, for truth to land. Behind her, her father sat in the audience. Isaiah Ellison, the man who once walked through segregated schools, who had worn his best suit into courtrooms where he was still called boy by men with lesser minds. He watched his daughter speak, not just as a father, but as a witness to history folding forward on itself. Naomi's closing words were not soft. They were carved. I do not want apologies. I want accountability. I do not want allies. I want architects. People who are ready to build something new, not just repaint what's already broken. Because the foundation is cracked, and some of us are tired of patching the walls. The room rose in silence, not in applause, but in awareness. And now, to you, elders who've marched through the dust of Montgomery, who buried sons too soon, who taught us how to survive the lie that we were less than. Know this. Naomi did not fix the world. She refused to accept it as it was. That refusal is the fire she inherited. That refusal is what she now passes on. Later, at the airport, yes, that same airport, Naomi walked past security again. No special escort. No fanfare. Just a calm awareness that her footsteps now echoed differently. She passed a young black girl with wide eyes, holding a boarding pass in one hand and a book on engineering in the other. The girl smiled at Naomi like she'd just seen the future walk past her. Naomi smiled back and whispered, "You're not alone. This is not where the story ends." Because stories like Naomi's don't end. They burn on. In every challenge, every resistance. Every generation is brave enough to ask more of this nation than what it's always given. And so I say to you, those who've carried the torch this long, rest, but do not stop watching. The children are speaking now, and they have not forgotten what you taught them. That the fire does not destroy us. It defines us.